of all the major policies from a legislation and ideological point of view that the GNU government faced last year in 2024 was the national health insurance. Now, the NHI over the last 12 months or so hasn't received the attention and grabbed the headlines as other policy planks of the ANC, such as expropriation without compensation, and of course the Bella legislation around basic education. But we have the NHI rearing its head once again. We initially assessed that it would not be implemented overnight in any case. Fiscal constraints and political pressure, as well as the balance of forces from civil society, from business, would be very strongly against the full implementation overnight of the NHI. But that doesn't mean one should underestimate that those in the Department of Health, in the ANC, and indeed in some other political parties still think the NHI is a good idea. It's the right thing for South Africa to implement, regardless of the fiscal and moral costs to South Africans who should be free to choose their healthcare. Joining us to discuss some of the latest developments around the NHI and possible steps towards its full implementation, we have Mr. Mike Settas, head of the Health Policy Unit at the Free Market Foundation. Mike, thank you very much for being back here on the CRA YouTube channel. This discussion is focused around recent reporting, and I'll link to the original article in the description below, where Dr. Nicholas Crisp has tried to clarify, or I guess direct South Africans that medical tax credits are at an end, and that will be done before the implementation of the National Health Insurance Scheme. Before we get into some of the implications of ending medical tax credits for medical aids, for, of course, South Africans who are on medical aids and who try, despite a low growth environment, to pull together what resources they can to still pay for private medical aids. Could you explain to us why medical tax credits are so important? What is some of the background for those?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Chris. I think they're effectively a tax relief on being a member of a medical scheme. They come in the form of a tax credit rather than a tax deduction, and what that means is that the benefit, the tax relief, is equal for all members, regardless of their income. So whether you're a low income earner or a high income earner, your tax relief is identical. And then it's based on the number of people so a single person would get roughly a break of around 360 Rand, I think it's around about there. And then each dependent on the medical scheme membership would double that figure, and then would go up accordingly. So it depends on, it's not dependent on income, but it is dependent on the size of the number of beneficiaries covered under the medical scheme. So the problem with that is that the impact, if it's removed, the impact hits the lowest income earners the hardest. And I know from some industry work that's been done by some players a couple of years back, noted that there were probably close to about 1 million families that would drop out of the affordability zone if the medical tax credits were removed. Now, to be fair though to what was published in the Business Day, the claims from Dr. Crisp are that they're only going to remove the medical tax credits for the highest income earners. But we don't have very many taxpayers in that highest income tax bracket. So, is it really then even worth it? Because the overall relief will be insignificant. So it's a bit of a non-issue in a sense because of that. But the sentiment is a problem, in terms of wanting to take away this tax break, which means a lot of people are able to afford private cover, which means that they then are not forced or compelled to rely on the state. And we all know where the state is in terms of its delivery capacity. So it's quite concerning that in essence, I know it's been couched in NHI rhetoric and to say it's development above the implementation of NHI. But NHI is so far away from any possible, and I'm very doubtful it has any hope of actually ever materializing. But why then bother with bringing up the medical tax or altering the medical tax credit now? Because if it's to replace, if it's in lieu of, you're going to get benefits out of the NHI, that's so far away. Why are we considering this now? To me, then, what it really breaks down to is it's just another tax increase. It's as simple as that. we know Treasury scratching their nose.
And I wonder, with the upcoming medium-term budget policy statement, we'll of course have the next main budget in February next year, whether we might see some of these hopeful calculations factored in. Entities such as Treasury and the Reserve Bank, I think more so Treasury, they are famous for, I think, overestimating South Africa's growth potential and tax revenue collection, and underestimating just how difficult, I think, things like inflation and kinds of and second, third, fourth forms of taxation, the anti-growth effect that those phenomena have on South Africa's economy and, of course, on the tax base. But Mike, just to ask you about sort of the funding question itself. So according to Dr. Chris, medical aid credits represent a loss to the fiscus. So it's interesting, it's termed in that way, a loss to the fiscus of about 34 billion rand, an amount that could be used for the NHI. So if you were Minister of Health, Minister of Finance, I don't know, running the cabinet as president, if you could find 500 billion rand, a trillion rand for the NHI per year, would that make the NHI work? Is it just a financial problem?
Well, I mean, I would say absolutely no. But I mean, you have to look at government's track record in managing the current public health system. I mean, it is, it's a massive stretch of the imagination to believe that they've done such a poor job of the current public health system, and now to say that we're going to build this new shiny NHI and it's going to be wonderful, it's going to give everyone maximum, they're going to have comprehensive cover, it's all going to be free. It's a wish list. It's not really a policy. So I don't think you could throw any amount of money at the NHI, because it still inherently is going to use the same underlying public health system as we have now, and the private system. But I mean, you remember the public system is way bigger than the private system in terms of numbers, sheer numbers, hospital beds, personnel, medical personnel, doctors, etc. The public sector is way bigger. So the majority of care is still going to be delivered through public health facilities, even though it's financed through the NHI. So I think, there has been this sort of sense in the policy build-up that it's, because it's going to rely on private providers, that, that's what's going to make it right. But, the private sector is way smaller than the public sector. So it needs to be understood there's still going to be the public sector delivering care. It's just how it's going to be financed that's different from what it is now.
Mike, if I could get your thoughts on a quote from that Business Day article. So you've got the MD of the Board of Healthcare Funders, Katlego Motudi, who told Business Day it was, quote, deeply concerning to note the contradiction between CRISP's recent affidavit submitted to the High Court, in which he states that the government is not considering the removal of medical tax credits in the short or medium term, and his recent statement in Parliament confirming discussions with the Treasury are underway to systematically phase out these credits to fund NHI, end quote. So, I mean, regardless of whether the NHI is implemented, tonight or over the next week, the next month, the next 6 months, never implemented, just some of these contradictory moves and statements by representatives of the Department of Health. Just your thoughts on what sort of signal that sends to healthcare professionals, I think specifically in South Africa, around the policy space, the legislative space, where they've invested so much in their careers and they want to work in this field in South Africa, but I don't think they're getting the sort of the clarity and the guidance that they need from government's point of view.
Yeah, I think, the whole NHI policy process has been characterized by heaps of contradictions all along the way. So it's not surprising to hear that, on the one hand, Dr. Chris says they're not looking at changing the medical tax credits, and then he states that they are. So, so I don't know where that drive is coming from, who's driving this desire to change it. As I say, it's been couched as if it's development around NHI, but I'm doubtful of that. I think it's more Treasury point of seeking another tax relief somewhere, or tax gain for a tax increase, if you like, for Treasury. I mean, we know from an article recently that tax collections are behind with. Supposedly the budget's on track, but the collections are behind. I don't know how they can sort of conflate or separate those two as if they're not the same thing. But and in terms of how it impacts the whole NHI in itself, has a negative impact upon the medical fraternity, because doctors are concerned. I mean, there have been several, not several, I'd say there are two surveys that come to mind. One was Solidarity, and I think one was SAMA, done quite a few years ago. And a very, very large percentage of doctors said that they were very concerned about NHI, and a sizable percentage said emphatically that if it comes into play, they're immigrating. So that is a concern around that. I don't know if the medical tax credit does impact them. It does to some degree, because remember, most private doctors are also medical aid members. They also get sick. They also need to go to doctors to get care and treatment. So as members, as consumers, they are impacted. But the NHI, in a more bigger picture around the whole policy itself, is concerning from a point of view that will it drive doctors away, and if it does, and again, the implications of that are a lot of these doctors are the high income earners that Dr. Crispy sort of targeting now. So it's complex. It's not easy that you just say you put this into place and that happens. And no sort of feasibility studies done around these sorts of things. What understanding is if you take that tax credit away, even if it is just for the top income earners, what is the impact? What feasibility study has been done around that to say what is the impact? Will doctors leave, or is that membership going to shrink? Maybe the assumption is that it won't, but we don't really know that, because no technical work is done on this thing, and that's been the NHR has been characterized by that from the beginning. Everything's done on hearsay and conjecture, and there's no real sort of technical analysis work around it. And this is probably pretty much the same.
Mike, maybe just a last question. Any thoughts on implications for public sector workers? And here I think about things like the GEMS scheme. If you look at just how big a proportion of government spending goes towards public service employees, how much of a proportion that makes up of sort of economic activity. It's not necessarily productive economic activity, but it is, if you purely look at the spreadsheets, it is there. For unions, for people who are part of GEMS, maybe other public sector medical aids, also similarly negative implications. Should the medical tax credits be removed, or would there be some kind of protections?
I'm not sure if there'd be any protections for them, but I mean, they are taxpayers just like all other formally employed people, and yes, it would impact them. So, and there are certain sizable high income earners in state sector. The GEMS is the majority of state employees who are on medical scheme cover are now on GEMS. There's a small percentage of a few other schemes, but the tax treatment's the same regardless of which medical scheme. But just by sort of virtue of the numbers, so 1/4 of the medical scheme membership now is sitting in state employees. So it's a sizable percentage of the private sector. And if removal of tax credits can impact them, that's going to then talk to wage negotiations between the state and the public sector unions. So, and I mean, we know the history of that. The public sector unions don't exactly back down on any sort of loss of benefits or increase in taxes for their members. So good luck to Dr. Crisp on that one. We'll see.
Now, perhaps at some point, should the government or those who are pushing for the NHI, should they misstep and give away the game too early, maybe we'll see quite a combined pushback between private sector businesses, medical aids, and the public sector. But we'll see if that sort of thing should arise. But Mike, I think we're going to wrap up on that note. Thank you very much for your time and your insights. Very valuable and important, I think, for all South Africans, just from a point of view of having the right kinds of reforms in terms of the medical sector, private and public healthcare, etc. So very likely that many within government will continue to push for the NHI in very open and subtle ways. We'll continue to monitor that and provide the appropriate information and analysis so that people can push back wherever possible, be that through their own sort of endeavor or supporting organizations such as the Free Market Foundation, should the FMF also then pursue any kind of legal action, but we'll also keep an eye on that. So Mike, thank you very much to all of you who joined us. Thank you very much for watching. We'll chat with you all again very soon. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.